Hello,
Yep.
hello. Thank you very much. So I'll start with Clare, who is the Regenerative Agriculture Director at FEI Farms. Clare works as part of the FEI consultancy team and is also a regenerative farmer and advocate, so roles in helping others to be sustainable, but also putting that into practice on the FEI farm in Oxfordshire. She has a background in food supply chains and has worked for large and small retailers, farming organisations, and has run her own sheep farming and catering business. So there's a lot of it about this morning. And Clare has spearheaded the transition to regenerative agriculture on FEI's farm with a view to optimising food production and having a positive impact on global challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. Iain is a director of Arbikie Highland Estate and with his brothers set up the Arbikie distillery in 2014 with the aim of being one of, if not the world's most sustainable distillery. They distill their family of field to bottle luxury spirits from the crops on their farms at Lunan Bay. My notes say on Scotland's sunny east coast, but at least on Scotland's east coast, Iain. These include Nadar, the world's first climate positive gin, which he'll correct me, I believe is a pea-based gin, and Highland Rye, the world's only rye Scotch whisky. And Iain's own provenance prior to setting up Arbikie Distillery was working with companies such as White & Mackay, Jim Beam Brands and Diageo, and also connection with William Grant's through the brothers' marketing business. So we have two speakers and panelists this morning who, as I say, both have experience of doing this for themselves, but also helping others to look at their businesses. And I'm going to start, I think, Iain, with you, if you don't mind, because one of the themes that I'd like to explore with you both is one of definitions, which sounds quite dull, but it's really about what we mean by sustainability. So Iain, your farming history, your farm goes back 400 years. Sustainability seems to be a watchword throughout and is certainly a watchword in terms of the distilling business, and you use language like climate positive and crop is king. From your perspective, what is sustainability? What is climate positive production? And how do you come by that meaning or that definition?
You mentioned the farming background. Obviously, our family farmed for over 400 years. So when we set up the distillery, it was a natural place to go because farm to bottle was already there. And probably it's an evolution over the last, say, 7 years. We're still a baby business. We've evolved it to field to bottle. So we're talking about specific fields, specific soils, specific crops, excuse my S's. And that kind of evolves to the place we are now with sustainability, because we are growing, we're distilling, we're maturing and bottling at the Arbikie Farm Distillery on Scotland's sunny east coast. I'll get that one in. And for me, that's what sustainability is all about. As you said, we want to be one of the world's most sustainable distilleries, and we're on that journey. And I think the Nadar piece was a key milestone in that one. Obviously, James mentioned collaboration. I think collaboration has been mentioned quite a few times, and our master distiller Kirsty did that in collaboration with the James Hutton Crop Institute and Abertay University. And I think having that expertise around us allowed us to widen our sustainability piece there, because the life cycle analysis were done by Trinity College Dublin and by Bangor University, and with Nadar, the Gaelic word for nature, that was all about growing peas, or the challenge of growing peas, but also gaining the benefits of taking 1.54 kilos of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and also getting a free nitrogen fix. So I think for farming, both farming and distilling, farming wise, you're getting that free nitrogen fix. So I think you'll see an increase in legume production in terms of sustainable farming, because I think the pricing of artificial fertilizers moved from about £250 to about £750 if you can get it. So if it's available, so things are going to change dramatically. And for me, that's what sustainability means. It's that growing, distilling, maturing, bottling, doing it on one site, single estate, but also still continuing on that journey and, you know, learning the things we learned at COP26 and elsewhere.
I think that point about having expertise around you is one that we'll probably want to talk about a bit more, Iain. That's very helpful, and Claire, that kind of leads into asking you the same sort of question about what you and FEI would regard as climate positive production. But I suppose the background for you is that you've been doing this now and FEI has been doing this now for 20 years. You've got lots of delegates here who've got their own challenges, their own sector specific questions to answer. What have you seen in terms of the evolution of these challenges, and what has changed, if you like, for you in the last decade, and maybe more recently in terms of what you're seeing? And could I ask you, Claire, also for those who don't know about regenerative farming, perhaps if you could start by saying a little bit about what's meant by regenerative farming as well?
Okay, I'll try and remember all of those things in what order I do them. I'm going to start with the challenges, because I think it's relevant to the regenerative thing. So yeah, for those of you that don't know, FAI, we work with food brands, tend to be larger food brands. McDonald's, IKEA, Barry Callebaut, Marks and Spencer would be an example of some of them on their kind of farming and supply chain sustainability strategies. And for us 20 years ago, that started off, it was all about animal welfare. We were all about animal welfare, and McDonald's were in the middle of their McLibel case. And at that point, many retailers or restaurant chains weren't very clear on where a lot of things were coming from. And then I would say we kind of went through the early 2000s through the animal welfare era. Then we moved into the sustainability era, where that was what everybody was talking about. And now we're moving into the regenerative space. And I think the reason for that is that, well, none of us have ever, well, although my fellow panelist has just defined sustainable very well for his own context, but, you know, in the main, defining sustainability on a global stage is pretty difficult. And in reality, we haven't achieved sustaining. We are still depleting, and as a world. And so we kind of got to stop thinking about sustainability and start thinking about restoration and regeneration, because in reality, we're dealing with a degraded resource. It's not our fault, it's not the previous generation, but through the Industrial Revolution and through the, in our country, you know, post-World War II, but many other countries around the world, that more higher yields, grow was right. It was right for the time. We needed food. But what it's resulted in is a system that maybe tends to deplete rather than replenish soil, water systems, etc. So we kind of going beyond sustaining now and trying to help our clients work on what does regenerating and start to actually put back, because sustaining is no longer enough. We know our climate crisis is worse than we ever realized, and so we have to start doing that. And what do we mean by regenerative agriculture? Because most commonly heard is, I think, phrases within when you start talking about regenerative agriculture is either A, I'm already doing it, or B, there's no definition and I don't understand it, so it's not, it's, you know, nobody can define it. And I don't think that there is no one definition that everybody's got behind, but if you read all of the explanations, and there's actually been a scientific paper written on what is regenerative agriculture, generally it's around restoring ecosystem processes, so maximizing photosynthesis, maximizing the ability of the water to cycle efficiently. And we know in our green and pleasant, sunny or not so sunny land that our water cycle is out of sync. Increased flood and drought events across the whole of our island is, we know that's something that's facing us, and there's something we need to readjust there, and that our soils are regenerating and not depleting. So there is no one definition for regenerative agriculture, but maybe that's what it's about. It is just about, is the land regenerating? Can we see signs and evidence that the soil, the land, the water cycles are regenerating rather than degenerating? What those are is another answer, but that's where I'll leave it for now.
And that's it was really interesting to hear you talk about the history, Claire, of the themes that have, if you like, driven the work that you've been doing and FEI has been doing over the years from animal welfare through to, you know, the current concept of sustainability. And it goes back to perhaps the conversation I had with James earlier in the day about what it is that will drive change, and James' conviction that consumers will be the driver of change in all of this and will be the main motivation. Is that what you have seen for your client base? Is it media pressure? Is it individual buying pressure that has been driving change?
It's a good question. I think it's a combination of all of those things. You know, there's something about avocados as an example. We didn't really know what they were. Now, did we as citizens in the UK demand avocado in everything, or was it put in front of us by retailers, by restaurant chain brands, and by the media as being something that was amazing, that suddenly drove our desire for an avocado? I don't think it was one over the other. Some would say it was everything's driven by citizen demand, but I don't know if that's always quite true. What I think we're seeing now is more factors playing into this. I think we have been quite passive as consumers and citizens, and we've kind of just taken what's been put in front of us, and we do demand it when it's there and we see it and we want it, but there's so many more factors at play now that those will drive and change more interesting shopping habits and consuming and purchasing habits over the next few years. It's quite hard at the moment for people to, as we all know, you know, to when in a big retail environment, to really make a choice, like, when I buy this, is it right, is it not, and what that looks like. But yeah, so I don't know whether labeling, I heard the traffic light labeling mentioned earlier, you know, whether that's the right solution. What it's hopefully driving is also more visibility, you know, about what is going on at ground level, and we just need to translate that through. But for small businesses, and I understand quite a lot represented here today, then there definitely seems to be that is something, that locality and closeness to home feels like a first step that I can do as a citizen to purchase something in a better direction.
Iain, it's the same point really for you, but from the perspective of an individual producer, you can see that consumer choice in your business is going to be influenced by the quality of what you do, by provenance, which is, I think, what Clare is alluding to, and price, and you're marketing something that is a premium product. I think that's a fair description. How significant do you see sustainability, climate positivity as selling points being for what you do? And I'm not suggesting that's why you're doing it, or entirely why you're doing it, but what's the consumer reaction to that, and how have you seen that change, if at all?
I mean, the consumers have definitely focused on sustainability because we're talking about it all the time. You know, COP obviously helped that way because it was on the agenda for at least the last 2 weeks, and will be on the agenda in terms of people watching what's there. And if you look at the activism of particularly the younger generations, they want to know things, they want that information. And I think actually lockdown perhaps helped on that as well, because a lot more people bought online. They had more time to what Clare was talking about, of actually standing in a retailer. When you're buying online, you have a lot more time to research what you're buying rather than just actually doing it. And
a lot more time to drink, Iain, during lockdown as well.
That's true. But then I think also consumers are drinking less but better. So I think they're quite happy to pay for that sustainability. I'm not saying that everyone, that's a general statement, but I think they're looking for that. And you are seeing an emergence of sustainable spirits movement. So, you know, it's cocktail menus, high-end bars, they're now doing sustainable cocktail menus. That's a theme. You know, we did quite a lot of work across COP26, and we were in demand because we have sustainable spirits. And I think that's, you know, that transparency and actually that honesty. And I was picking up a bottle when I was there. When we actually launched our Highland Dry, we put on the field of
other brands are available to you now.
No. I'm just making the point in terms of transparency. Rather than being on the back, we put it on the front, and actually the consumers and the bar people loved that, because it was just a case of there's the way we do things. And I think I think transparency along with sustainability is really, really important. And that's why we're looking forward to bringing people up. We're opening up the distillery in April next year so people can come and see what we do. And it is about growing and farming, an education piece on, as farmers, you're educating people on how you grow potatoes, how we grow lemongrass or chilies or whatever else, the traditional crops, but also why you might want to grow peas because of the regenerative agricultural piece that's in there for the soils. So, there's part of a movement, but also I think a responsibility is the right word in that space, but also willing to be transparent and share and collaborate with who would be termed our competitors. We're very visible. The Nadar, research and the piece that Kirsty did with the James Hunt Institute in Arbikie, that's all published information. So, during COP, I made the point in terms of the climate opportunity, perhaps for someone like the gin industry, and we're in that space, is instead of buying in wheat-based white spirit, that they buy in pea-based white spirit. So there could be a change because you're obviously gaining the benefits of nitrogen fix on the soils, and also you're taking carbon dioxide out. So there's an opportunity for a very large industry to make that change if they want to, or if consumers then ask the gin industry, where are you buying the spirit from and what kind of spirit it is? Because most consumers don't know. But now I think they do, and the more knowledge they gain, the more they're likely to change and choose.
And I think that transparency point again goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about paper trail, about auditability, about trust, about people feeling that they can make an educated choice about what they're buying. Now, that last response, Iain, among all your responses, demonstrates that you have a great deal of expertise now in this field. And you've mentioned already having the support of others with expertise to help the business. And I'm going to come to Clare because that's part of what business she is in. But did you begin with an inkling of those that were available to help you? Did you know where you could get that support? How does a fairly small or startup enterprise get that kind of expertise and support at the ground level?
Was that for Clare or me?
No, for you, Iain, and I'll go back to Clare.
I think just reaching out. I mean, obviously we're members of Scotland Food and Drink, as any sensible food and drink business in Scotland should be, because James' team do a great job. The people at Scottish Enterprise do a good job. The guys at SDI do a good job. We get help right across the board. We're very, very lucky as a small country to have that kind of support mechanism. But also we're surrounded by fantastic universities, colleges. I think the reach out. We hired Kirsty and Christian from Heriot Watt, in terms of our distillers, and those kind of networks that Kirsty was obviously doing her PhD, or maybe I didn't say that, that Nadar came out from her PhD, and that's why she was working on the legume side with James Hutton, or to be specific, Dr. Pete Ionetta, and obviously Graham Walker at Arbikie University, Professor Graham Walker. And I think those people are there, and I think people just need to reach out. And there's a lot of expertise there, but they also want real case studies. So that's where, when we were looking at our distillers, I went to Heriot Watt and went, basically, who's doing your MSc course? We're looking for distillers. We've got lots of projects to do in terms of building this distillery, because you're saying I'm an expert. I'm not an expert at all. We're learning every day, and I think there's so many people like Clare out there with knowledge that we can learn from and the way they've worked. So I think for people looking, just go out and ask. And I think through the enterprise network and other, there's loads of connections, but also Scotland Food and Drink, I would signpost straight away, because there's a great team there and a very well connected team.
And Clare, you as you've said, have a large number of larger scale clients in the food sector, and interested in hearing, in terms of looking at that part of the sector, what you're seeing in terms of the need for strategic advice and training. What is changing? What do you see as being their priorities in terms of the next 5 years or so? How will your business respond to that?
Yeah, I think I'll also just mention as well that Iain, you just mentioned about case studies, and that's what we wanted to do on the farm here. That's one of the things that we realised, that people talking about regenerative agriculture, if the natural thing is you start following all the guys in the States, and that's what you end up doing. And our thing was like, can we do multi-paddock grazing like they do over here. And so the first thing we did was we thought, well, we should be able to, but we've got no idea of how to do it. So employing some, bringing on some consultants to help us with that, even at our farm level, was the first stage of that, because we've had to learn. And I think what's key to all of this is that in the past we've relied on products or tools, things that we buy. So we haven't got such good yield, we buy this product, it makes the yield better. And actually what we need to start doing is it's about knowledge, because we've sort of lost a bit of connection with the soil and the landscape and how it reacts and what it does, and to look for the signs in order to change things and look for more natural solutions, because natural solutions tend to be free. And so what we're seeing is a shift both at farm level and throughout on knowledge rather than products or tools. And I think, but more strategically, which is what your question was about, where everyone's at the moment is carbon, which sort of the conference, carbon neutral. We're going to be net zero by insert year here. And I thought it was really interesting earlier with one of the previous speakers talking about only 3 or 4 years in, ripping up a 10-year strategy and having to do it again because the pace of change, and those that had maybe set carbon commitments for years long in the future are maybe looking to reduce them. But I think where we're maybe finding a lot of our conversations going at the moment is, don't have your carbon blinkers on. It is about carbon, but it's not just about carbon. And if you just focus on carbon, we forget everything else: biodiversity loss, health. We talk about how do we finance better food? Well, we look at the amount that we spend on treatment of food-related disease, and we need to start merging those two things together. We've worked in silos, and it has brought great growth in certain things, but actually it's maybe some of the undoing of what we've done. So what we're trying to do is work out how amongst the commitment, but of course it's important that businesses are making carbon commitments, because people care about that, and it's one simple thing that we can all latch onto. So it's really important that businesses have those, but it's then what we're trying to do is help shape those so that they deliver on carbon, but they also deliver biodiversity loss, farm profitability, all the other things that that need to be delivered.
That answered the question I was actually going to ask you, and I find that very reassuring actually, because but you can see that risk, can't you, of carbon pushing out other questions of sustainability or organic production or animal welfare, to name a theme that you'd mentioned previously. So I at least find that reassuring. I want to stay with you, Clare, and talk about the economic viability of all of this, because obviously we've talked with Iain about this as a premium product, and quite rightly for him. The question is whether people will buy less but buy better. I think you work with producers who are not always in the premium sector and who are offering their products to a wider range. And it would be interesting just to hear you say a little bit about the challenges of maintaining economic viability while not just talking sustainability but actually implementing it.
Yeah, so it's our business has always framed this around the 3 E's. We call it ethics, which is people and animals, environment and economics. And you can't deliver sustainability or any kind of future-proof, resilient business if you don't have all 3 of those in some kind of balance. They will often create some tension, but it's important to understand all of them. Increasingly, as we go forward, I think it's important that a business is profitable, like that, full stop. Otherwise, they don't have a business, and we all accept that. So finding that right balance. But there are some interesting things that come out. For example, a very low input, grass-based, outdoor all year round, sequestering carbon in areas of the world where you can't produce anything else, like Scotland. So your cattle system is going to be cheaper to run than a more grain-based system and everything else. But we've maybe just got a bit of a mindset shift because, for example, if we were just thinking about carbon, the best things to do to reduce the carbon footprint would be to finish those animals as quickly as possible, bring them in a shed, put up loads of concrete and feed them grain. So there's some interesting kind of angles coming out. The other thing I think which we're talking about a lot more is that what is productivity, although it's slightly different to profitability, but actually for farmers often profitability, margin. So a lot of farmers will focus purely on yield, and any conversation about moving away from yield, it kind of fills everybody with horror. But at the moment, we kind of define ourselves and we're proud of our tons per hectare, number of livestock head per hectare, however we achieve it. But actually, firstly, is that delivering our margin for profitability? Probably not in all cases. And also, are we working with the right productivity measures? Because we know we can increase yield, but we're bringing in how many inputs and what's the impact of those in order to achieve it. And also, we talk about feeding the world and come back to earlier conversation. And I think we really have to start asking ourselves the question is, are we trying to feed the world with calories, or are we trying to nourish the world? So what we actually need is more nutrient dense food, and that will be produced in a different way. So if we, in a more regenerative way, maybe where soil health is better, so there's better microbial activity in the food and there's better nutrient density. We know that, mentioned earlier, the price of our food has all come down, and the nutrient density of our food has, the vitamins, minerals, etc., that are found within most of our common foods are decreasing. And if we, for example, were to define ourselves by the amount of vitamin C per hectare, we would suddenly have a really different business model, and that would be something that would be, really interesting to explore. Does that answer your question? I went a bit off tangent there, sorry.
It answers it and more, Claire, I think, in terms of the issues on making it economically viable. And Iain, this I think takes us into wider questions about the sustainability of the industry and the evolution of the whisky and drinks industries in Scotland. And I'm conscious that I know your business has been investing with the help of HSBC sustainable funding in a visitor centre. This is a diversification, if you like, of what is your main business. What do you see as being the evolution of your business and the sector's activities in terms of using sustainability to diversify what you do?
I think, the whisky industry as a whole has made really good progress in a sustainable space. But I think, like James mentioned before, imagine every time you're setting something in paper, you're going to have to rip it up and start again, or speed up the process. I think, as the leading export sector, it's something, within Brand Scotland that there is a responsibility there, because I think Scotland as a space can be a very sustainable space, particularly in terms of food and drink. So there's a competitive advantage, there's a brand advantage, and actually the whisky industry is key within that. I think the collaboration piece again is very strong. That as an industry, it's incredibly collaborative, the whisky industry, and long may it continue. So, I think us at Arbikie, our role, I'd always see, and I was talking about that last week, is almost like a laboratory, because we're only a 7-year-old startup. If you're thinking whisky, it's decades and centuries, so we've hardly started. And we can do things that some of the others can then go, actually, that worked quite well, or there's something we could do if we managed to do it on a relatively small scale. If you're suddenly talking the scale of Diageo, where I used to work, it's a different size of business altogether. So I think, what's a good example? The Green Distilleries competition, we won into phase 1 of that. That's a UK-wide. There was 15 distilleries won into the competition. There's a phase 2 demonstrator phase that's coming up, is going to be announced relatively soon. Hopefully we can be in that, but we're also planning to power our distillery with green hydrogen, so looking at solar and wind. And so there's another opportunity there to pioneer, but also at the same time, I guess government has to come with that in terms of planning and everything else. I think within that, there's a speed thing there of moving forward the processes and actually letting people do things like that are pioneering, because we can then lead. And I think going back to where Clare was before, in terms of, we're now growing heritage barleys. When our father passed, who was a farmer all his life, we went back to his growing diary, and we've gone back to barley varieties that don't exist. So we've gone to seed bank propagation, and we'll have barleys that no one else has to make single malt whiskey, so you can be more sustainable, because that's not about yield. Your yield is definitely decreased. It's more about flavor. So it's a mindset in terms of less yield, more flavor, potentially a more lucrative exclusive product. So it's making that almost regression back to where we were previously. And as you mentioned, we have the world's only rye whiskey just now, and that wasn't really an innovation because it was done 200 years ago. We just went back and actually rye is a much less yielding crop. But so there's things that we can learn from the past, things that you can bring back in, and we're almost relearning what we did in the past. And that's where experts like Derek Stewart, I think, is on the call here this morning at James Hutton. There's experts in the barley field, and there's so many experts in this small country that can be tapped in, and we can learn from and collaborate with.
We're now in the more kind of official question and answer part of this session, so I'm really keen to hear from the audience with any further questions that they have. Before I get to them, my kind of last question to each of you is, and this is really triggered, Iain, by what you've been saying about collaboration and the expertise that you've drawn on, which has been, if I hear you correctly, predominantly on the Research Institute academic side, and indeed Scotland Food and Drink. We talked with James about what one thing government could do to make this all easier, and the answer might be just leave well alone and leave us alone. But for each of you, what would be your top of your wish list for government or legislative intervention or support, if anything? Iain, start with you.
I think I alluded to one of them as the planning process, because I think planning can always be slow. And, it's obviously slow for, because there's detail there and there's impact, but also at the same time, if we want people to change quite rapidly, that has to be enabled. And I think also alluded to with government funding in terms of green distilleries, and it's a very expensive thing to do. So anywhere they can help in terms of priming that funding or match funding or whatever, I think that helps an awful lot, because you're encouraging people to take risks. Yeah,
a bit of money. Clare?
Yeah, what a question. I think providing, as we go through this changing time at farm level, although most of my work is retailer end focused, ultimately they're all buying food which starts at farm level. So providing this in this changing time of support payments, which I think it's going to be difficult along the way, but it is reframing things for hopefully a better future, that there is the right level of support, but also keep like that they keep up. The pace of change now is like I've never seen it before, and some of the stuff I hear coming out is what we were kind of thinking about 2 years ago, but making it will be different to the usual model, but support for training, learning, getting out on farms and understanding more about different ways of producing food. Hopefully Elms will deliver that, we shall see.
Yeah, and Iain, just going back to your point about funding as well, both your points about funding, a question specifically for you from Alistair Duncan, which is around the extent to which research and development tax reliefs have been significant in what you've been doing.
I mean, anything like that always helps, because ultimately, it encourages to do those. If you're getting relief on doing that research and development, absolutely. The more of that, the better. And, going back to the Nadar product, that was part of a legume European network that we were working with. So there was a partnership across Europe and a sharing of knowledge, but also there was funding there for, those groups to get together and share that knowledge. And I never thought I'd speak at a legume conference before, but I did. And there were some very, very intelligent people there and me, and you're just going, it was kind of interesting, but every day's a learning day.
Well, I hope to goodness that it was not more interesting than our conference today, and I would hate to come second to a legume conference, but hey, who knows? Claire, a question about the relationship between producers and retailers, and just the point being made that some retailers are looking for extra credentials, if you like, from producers, and reference to the leaf mark, and obviously that creates a burden, but also an opportunity, and really just the question being asked around what you see coming next over the horizon for that kind of development, and indeed whether you see it as a positive thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we talked about with regenerative, there isn't one definition. It's very difficult, therefore, for a regenerative standard, although there are things being worked on. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is some are maybe looking at what those look like, particularly maybe those that are a bit further removed from the farming supply base. But actually, where businesses are really recognising is that this is about working with their supply chain, so farmer pilots, training, understanding things. And because it's very difficult, you know, the old model is come up with a standard, tell everybody to do it, you have to do it, tick the box, move on. But because every farm is so that's what's great about regenerative agriculture for me. Every farm is so unique, and this is for the first time in a long time an opportunity that's recognised, and that no one can really come in and tell somebody how to farm regeneratively. So I think there will be, and it's probably right that new and different and evolved standards like LEAF and on versions of that, some elements of LEAF are still input based. I think we'd like to see standards of the future be more outcomes focused on what's coming out rather than the tick box exercise, not LEAF, but some other assurance schemes end up being. But yes, it's I think it's almost a watch this space. We don't really know what that's going to look like, but a connection between where food is coming from and how it's produced is and those selling it is coming in, is evolving in a way that we've maybe not seen before, because we've had that more rigid standardized format. Another thing just to note that is interesting as well, it was mentioned before about the kind of, this is a pre-competitive issue, and I think we're definitely seeing that as well. So yes, naturally all businesses talk about that importance of the financial element, will want to build something that's exclusive to them, because that's how they're going to, you know, improve their business situation. But what we're also seeing is a lot more collaboration. So there is a recognition with groups like OB2P. We have our own re-dairy collaboration, so a number of different competing companies working together in a pre-competitive way on regenerative agriculture. And those are just a couple of examples, which I feel like there's always been some collaboration, but there's a movement behind that, which is exciting. So there's the kind of combination of, yeah, let's just get this done, and then actually how can we make our own bit special with our own producers.
It's really, really helpful. We are really now just at the end of our session. I think our delegates have run out of questions to ask, and my only final one would be, what do you think of Clarkson's farm? But I'm not going to ask either of you that or run a poll on this conference this morning, because I'll get into even more trouble than James Withers got himself into before 10 o'clock this morning. So it just remains for me to thank you both for a really interesting panel session. Thanks for your time and giving up part of your morning to be with us, and we will say thanks to you properly at the end. But for now, I am going to pass over to Eric, who is going to take us into the last part of the morning with our spotlight speaker.